Hi, in this frameworks tutorial, we're going to create a design component that will be connected to a real API. We're going to create a component that will display an inspirational quote. So let's start by creating a new frame, which will be 330 by 200 pixels. I'm going to set border radius to 10. To make it more interesting, we want to have a nice background for our frame. And to do that, we're going to use one of the components from the frameworks store. I'm going to search for Unsplash images, and we're going to install this component and then drop it to our frame. Let's make sure that it fits perfectly. Next, I'm going to set a search term to sky. Okay, that looks pretty nice. Next, let's drop a text element into our frame. So I'm gonna type quote will be here as a placeholder. I want to adjust this text element as well. So first I'm gonna make sure that it's fixed size. Then I'll set 30 pixels. Offset from the left, 30 from the top, and 30 from the right. And also let's make sure that the height is 100 pixels. Now we're going to increase the font size to 20, and let's make it bold. That looks pretty good. Now let's drop another text component that we'll use to display the quote author. So the author. Now for the author text, I want it to be regular. I'm going to make it a little smaller, like 16 pixels. And let's also make sure that it's fixed and it's aligned to the bottom with the offset 30, 30, 30, and let's make it right aligned. Okay, that looks pretty good. The only thing that I want to add is a slight gradient to make sure that the text remains visible even if we have very light image. So to do that, I'm going to create another frame, which I'll draw right on top of our component. And let's make sure that these three elements are not nested inside of the frame. So we'll rearrange it, and let's make sure that we have image first, then the frame, then our text. All right, we can rename it to gradient, and let's actually make it a gradient. So I'm going to adjust the fill setting. I'll switch it to linear and set 40% opacity. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we can right click on our frame and choose create component. Let's name this component quote. When we connect this component to the real API, we want to make sure that we can customize the text or the quote that is displayed over here and the author. So we want to go to the master quote settings and enable these two checkboxes. Let's rename the first one to be text, and the second one will be author. Now we need to connect this component to the API. So to do that, we're going to create a new code component. So I'm going to switch to the code tab and click on the new button. I'll call this component Kanye quote, and I'm going to hit create. So we're not going to need any of the boilerplate, so we can remove everything here and here. To get the actual quote, we're going to use this public Kanye.rest API that returns a JSON with a random Kanye West quote. So I'm going to copy this URL over here, and from our Kanye quote component, I'm going to use React use effect hook. And inside of this hook, we want to fetch from this API endpoint, and then the result that we get will be the JSON. So we want to parse it as JSON, and once it's parsed, we're going to get an actual quote from JSON.quote. To store this quote within our function component, we're going to use state hook. So I'm going to add quote and set quote method, and I'm going to use React use state hook. Now the initial state will be just an empty string, and once we fetch the data and parse it as JSON, we just need to call set quote and pass it the actual quote. Last thing that we need to do is to pass this quote into our quote design component. We can get access to all of our design components by importing from a special file called canvas. This file contains auto-generated code for all the design components that we have on the canvas. So I'm going to import our quote component. With that in place, all is left is return the quote component, and of course we want to set the text property to the quote, and I'm going to use a template literal with the quote just to add nice air quotes in front and in the end of the quote. And then we also need to set the author property, which in this case we can hard code and just say that it's Kanye West. Now I can switch back to the canvas view, and if we go to components tab, we're going to see a brand new Kanye quote component. So let's drag it onto the canvas, and here you go. We have a component that loads data from the actual API. And now we can add as many of them as we want. And if we need to adjust the designs or change, for example, the author font size or weight, we can just change our design component. So let's make it bold. And as you can see, all of our connected components are updated as well. And that is the end of this video. I really hope you found it useful. I'll see you in the next one.